In this video, we're going to be looking at the chart of where we fit in and focusing on the Tabletop Storyteller section. Let's dive in and see if we fit into the Tabletop Storyteller section. As for the Tabletop Storyteller, I've found most players and many DMs actually fall into this category. The mechanics of rolling to play is very important. They don't want a whole lot of role-playing or taking on their character or acting with silly voices or delving into backstories, but they want to have a really well-built character or game world or story. But they definitely want their heroes, the characters and NPCs, to pretty much be immune to the mechanics of the game for the sake of the story to continue. So we'll look at both of the axes that we use for this chart so we can understand the concept a little bit better as we dive into this quadrant of our table and look at the Tabletop Storyteller. The first axis we'll look at is going to be the story section versus mechanics. And starting at the kind of lower end and working up, we look at feasibility of interactions and outcomes are based on storytelling elements. Story flows and changes based on character interactions. So there's some fluidity to the world around the characters. They're the central component. And characters and NPCs are immune to the mechanics for the story agency. So, for instance, if the players are walking into a trap, the DM may have to change that trap so that the characters don't actually get caught and unable to proceed because the story needs to go on. And then at the very pinnacle, characters and NPCs are immune to mechanics for story agency. So this example would be a third level party going up against a red dragon who's an ancient red dragon, having some type of a third party swing in and drive off the dragon or something along those lines. The character, the NPCs, the game world is basically immune to the roll of the dice because the story has to continue. It has to move on. So the story is more important than the actual mechanics. So that's where I see this being used the most in current games that I've encountered and witnessed and watched and even participated in. The story is the most important aspect of the adventuring group, of the party. And that could be for the dungeon master who wants to tell a campaign story, as well as the players who want to tell their character's story. So story is more important than the mechanics and the mechanics outcome on the story and the participants in that story, whether that be the characters, the villains, the NPCs. The focus here is on storytelling. As we look at the next axis, that's the one we call role play, R-O-L-L play, or rolling play, when we're not looking at the chart to see how I spell it. I'll have to come up with a new word for it. So this axis is all about the interaction of the player and character in the game world, is how I like to think of it. So to the very left, a roll should determine every interaction, meaning the player just wants to chance everything to the dice. The dice should roll to see if they have to have any luck finding objects, if they can persuade a shopkeep down. They do not want to interact the player as their character. It should all be up to the dice. Moving further to the right, they're going to be pre-planning their character or NPC if we're looking at a DM and their progression to maximize skills, abilities, and mechanics. So they've thought what they're going to multi-class to make sure that they've got the best build for the story. Now moving further to the right, if they're not pre-planning the total progression of the character through the story, they've at least got a good build to determine what their character is going to have the most optimized build to start the story. So they're looking at origins, classes, races for balance and mechanics. They're still looking at their character. How can their character be best optimized for the story? So here again, some of the mechanics as far as the character and the character's interaction and opportunity in the story is relevant, but the story is more important than the actual mechanics. So this axis here really focuses on they're going to utilize character interaction to the world rather than role play as the player acting out their character. They want to use the checks, they want to use the ability checks, feat checks, class checks. They want to use the character build that they use to determine success and failure. But success or failure should not impact the progression of the story. And that's the two axes that make up the tabletop storytelling section of our grid. Now, you may be a tabletop storyteller but land in different sections on this grid, so being aware of where you land. If you don't want to interact, you just want the dice to determine everything, but you want complete immunity to mechanics for the story to proceed, you'd be in that upper left-hand corner, because the rolling of the dice is the most important thing. You don't want to interact. However, you want to continue the story. You want to see your character story and the campaign story through to the end, but you don't want to act out as your character at the table. That's why you've built a character, so you can test their skills and abilities, not so you have to act them out. And as we look at someone who's a little bit more open to change and adapt and progress their character, we're going to move to the right side. We know that the story may impact our character a little bit. We're not as certain that they need to be immune from mechanics. They can be affected by mechanics. But we want the story to shape who the character becomes. We're going to be on the lower right-hand side. While we may act out a little bit of what our character does and says, we're still more worried about rolling to see whether there's success or failure than actually how good our performance is to guarantee success or failure or interactions. It's still about rolling the dice, but we let the story shape our character as we move along, and that allows us to continue to develop our story and possibly develop the story of the character as we progress. Now, if we were a little bit more likely to want to have the story impact our character, but no matter what, we want our character to make it through to the end because it's a collective story, we would be in that upper right. Our character is the hero, and they should be to the end of the story. It's the character story in with the campaign story. But we don't know what that story is going to be. We're just along for the journey. When we get to the end, we'll get to the end. But we need to get to the successful end of our character's story. We're going to be at the upper right. We don't have pre-planned notions. We don't have determining factors of how it's going to end. We're along for the ride. But we're going to roll the dice to find out how that ride goes. And then kind of mid-lower left, if we're thinking more about the descriptions that are provided for impacting to play, how impactful they are to us, but reassuring that checks and saves allow us to cope with the gaming world, we're going to be kind of in the mid tier but still low. Whether or not the fantastic descriptions that the DM gives us allow us to utilize our checks and balances. We know they could fail, and that may mean that the story is not able to continue the way we thought it was going to be. So we're a little more pragmatic in the fact that success and failure is going to impact the story because of the mechanics. We may have a little bit more descriptive thing on how we're going to overcome some of those challenges, and we'll have a little more interaction, but we're still going to leave it all up to the dice and let the dice determine success or failure. So that is our Tabletop Storyteller section. And there again, it's more about the storytelling, but the rolling play aspect of a tabletop game. And again, I would say this is where I see the majority of current players that I have had the happy opportunity to play with, as well as several DMs that I have had the opportunity to play with. And I think part of that is actually due to the nature of the online game that we're having to do. We don't have an opportunity to physically interact with people, and it's a little bit more challenging to build up long-term trust with others when we're not able to play at the table face-to-face together. And I know there are quite a few people who also have anxiety issues and social anxiety challenges that make tabletop storytelling a little more comfortable area for them to enjoy the game in. So it's a fantastic area as long as you have people who are also in that same area. You don't want to be stuck with someone in a different tier if that's the tier you're in, just because you'll all have more opportunity to gel and get to a positive outcome that all of you will enjoy. And that's the graph we'll cover now. And in our next video, we'll jump into a different tier and talk about the differences for the next section. I hope you join us. Make sure you give us a comment down below and let us know what you would alter, what you like, what you enjoy, if you're in this tier or not, or what you would do to change out this tier. Of course, this is going to be a changing document, so it'll get adjusted as we continue to dive in. Hope you enjoy, and I hope to have you watch our next video covering our next section of our graph. Thanks for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. Here's another video I think you might enjoy. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up, and make sure to hit that bell so you get notifications whenever we post new videos. Help us answer the question of where will your adventures take you?